Hi, my name is Ken Lasseson. I wrote the Microbiome prescription site, maintain it and add data and do occasional analysis. Two types of analysis are of special interest to me from personal experience. One is chronic fatigue syndrome, and one is autism spectrum. Today we have an analysis looking at chronic fatigue syndrome, a person in the late teens, early 20s, who is mild CFS, doesn't have full severe, reasonably functioning. However, what we do have is that we have two samples taken only days apart, one of which on a 10-point scale, he was a 5. The second one, he dropped down all the way to about a 1, according to his caregiver, which means that we have what I call a sweet analysis to do. The reason is that as time goes on, your microbiome drifts. So if you're doing 6 months apart, sometimes it's hard to really determine what changed in the 6 months from the change of supplements, etc. In this case, we have only one. We have a change. We're not sure what the cause is, but what we're trying to do is understand what changed. We're not looking at chronic fatigue syndrome, trying to improve it as a whole, but what we are trying to do is understand what caused the significant deterioration in a matter of 10 days, what bacteria are associated. Again, I'm making assumption bacteria is the cause. There's growing evidence that bacteria and bacterial composition is a key factor in chronic fatigue syndrome. If that is true, then of course we are going to find things indicating that in the difference in the microbiome sample. If microbiome has nothing to do with it, I should find nothing. So let's see what we find. Okay, the two samples performing at level 5 was on the 5th. Very good. Performing at level 1 was on the 16th. Begins with number 1. Okay, also good in terms of mnemonic remembering. Here is the interesting thing, just wanted to start from my first impression. What we have is we have 636 different types of bacteria in our first sample, and we drop down to 436 samples. That's a significant shift in 2 weeks. Something basically came in. I would suspect, if I didn't know better, to say, oh, perhaps an antibiotic did it. I mean, that's the type of drop you often see. It will alter some bacteria and almost eliminate it. So pre and post antibiotic, that's a type of pattern. But the person wasn't on antibiotic. The person went into a crash in terms of chronic fatigue syndrome. So let's take a look at a bit more information. At this point, I'm going to do a quick FYI and simply point out that this video result is also available as a blog post, which should be uploaded today. And again, goes through, and I go through and I take a look at things. And what I'm going to do is basically go through some of the same things and create a blog post, but I'm also going to go and show you some of the explorations which I did prior to writing the blog post. And why that is important is that there's no one strategy suits all for doing analysis, and I figured to mention that, hey, everything is summarized in a nice spot, clear through, spell things out logically without the wandering through different tables and charts, which I'm going to be showing in this video. So if you are cognitively challenged, you may want to hop over to the blog post and then come back selectively to this larger presentation. Okay, now, the starting point is actually multiple samples comparison, which actually gives us a tremendous number of different ways of comparing results of one measurement to result of the second measurement. We can even do 3, 4, 5, 6, but 2 is a sweet spot. If you only pick 2, then a few additional columns show up, which you will see in a moment. And let's first go in and somewhat hop towards the N1. First is end products. End products, the data is fragmentary, so end product numbers are not to be 100% trusted. They seem in general to be fairly good and representative, but the information was gathered from many sources, and no definitive source like KIG or other which will make the analysis easier and the data more secure. Somebody needs to produce such a magic source. If they do so and make it available to me, I'll gladly incorporate it. I'm all for improving the quality of data analysis. So we have key thing is two things. We'll go and click view report, and there we have each of the substance, the count, and the percentile. You notice the first one, absolutely no change. We're 2 weeks apart, no change, same reading. Next one, same thing. Next one, we have a little bit of a drift. And the numbers here double, but the percentile ranking went up only a little bit. And over here, you see what the ratio of change is, and it is relatively small. And then we can go on down, and we can see other things are very close to the same, which means that, as we suspected, there are not many changes from one to the other. So what we want to do is find what has changed. I mentioned earlier that what it looked almost like if somebody had done antibiotics, but they hadn't. But nature has its own antibiotics. It's called biogens. And let's take a look at what is there for biotins. And here we have different styles of biotins. These are bacteria these are peptides if you will, rich antibiotics being produced by one bacteria against other bacteria. So we have all of them listed here. We go down here, and what we notice over here is every single one went up. And if you take a look at the numbers from 78% to 85%, so increase some, but we come down to a few others. Here it went from 50% to 85 percentile, and look at the count difference. The count difference is very great. So we have a major shift there, and a couple others, another major jump. So we have a bunch of major jumps. The ones with double numbers have both things showing significant increase of the percentile and significant increase of the actual count, which means that whereas before we had everyone having the same values between the two samples, here we have something which has changed dramatically between the two samples. But there's one more thing I want to take a look at, and that is because it's also an antibiotic, but it's not a bacterium. And that is an old friend, hydrogen peroxide. And actually, let's just look for hydrogen. And we find that hydrogen peroxide here shifted upwards, but what is really interesting is it was already very high and it's gone up even higher. It hints, and as it went further in, it hints strongly that unlike the majority of chronic fatigue patients where lactic acid was the dominant factor, it looks like hydrogen peroxide may be a very significant factor for this person. And so here we have something actually going down. Hydrogen sulfide went down, which is probably a good thing. That's associated with SIBO. So the person was further away from SIBO. And that's it. So this one thing did increase, but you notice that almost everything else was keeping pretty close to each other. So it's there. Let's go and let's take a look at lactic acid, which is the last one. Lactic acid, we have a increase. Remember I mentioned that chronic fatigue syndrome tends to have increased lactic acid. So we have still one more thing. So we have 3 factors which have significant changes. And if you look at other factors, most of the other factors are almost the same from one sample to the next. We have the bacterium, the natural antibiotics being produced. We have hydrogen peroxide going up, and we have lactic acid going up. Lactic acid going up isn't into the spectacular ranges which one would expect for chronic fatigue symbol, but it is a significant jump in 20%. So probably minor, but it's something to simply keep on the radar. So that is one of the little way. And let's stop for a moment and go back. Actually, I had to get out of full screen because it was a prior tab rather than just going back. And then we have other things. We could go down and see what are the bacteria taxonomy outliers and see what has changed. Again, we're trying to, our focus is different than the usual, as in we are focused on what changed, not what provides conditions. The outliers would usually go and do it, and what we basically see is we see things go from low, very low or non-existence all the way up to very high level emphasis on genuses. So we can see that things are juggling all over the place. We could try going through each one of these individual bacteria, but that is a challenge. And there's actually a better way to do it. And if we go back to here, what we can do is just click on this number and it will give you distribution. Sorry. It's this number I should have clicked on. Up. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. As you can see, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. Up at the crack of dawn. Okay, is the number I should be clicking on is the actual count. And then it goes over and lists all of the counts there. So if we go and click here to sort things by order, we see that Lactobacillus is the greatest contribution of it. And if you go down, we see that actually is Lactobacillus. In fact, the greatest contribution of it, a big hunk of it, all comes from one particular species. And here's where the things will get interesting. This species, Lactobacillus rugosae, is not the one usual thing. You won't find any probiotics with it in at all. Actually, it turns out you can't culture. There are no samples to use, which means it is a somewhat mysterious bacteria because we can detect it by a variety of ways. But there are no samples in the sample repository which you can culture, which means what we know about it is reduced. What we do know about it is that in a woman's healthy vagina, it is the dominant species. And why is it the dominant species? Because it's a very powerful hydrogen peroxide producer. So although we have it also being a lactic acid producer, it also a hydrogen peroxide producer. And the hydrogen peroxide is what keeps that vagina healthy, kills up just about all the other nasty bacteria. But if it's located in the gut, it has the aspect of disturbing the overall gut functions. Okay, so that is how we can go and do it. We could go over and go back and take a look at hydrogen peroxide. Here again, we click on the number and we now see that there's only one item involved, and that's Lactobacillus, and we already know which one under Lactobacillus that is hydrogen peroxide producer. Indirectly, but the information is reliable, and we could actually go back to the bacterium class and let's see which one has the biggest class. This one right here. Let's count and see what it is. And over here we have the count. And we got family or genus and species. But what we really want to do is take a look at what's the biggest contribution. One is a family, that's nice, but we really want to get down to genus or species level. And what we find is a real heavy contributor, let's go and restart this one, is Blottia. So we have a specific genus which we are concerned about. So we have an unusual lactobacillus, and we have Blottia as being two major players. We do have Streptococcus here, but it's a relatively minor player in terms of the contribution. We go through each one and do the same thing and get a picture, but you'll find that Blottia keeps showing up. Blottia is a prolific producer of natural antibiotics. Now I'm going to continue onwards doing due diligence, that's checking out everything and not just running with the first thing that showed up. As I've indicated, I already sort of gone through the material already, so just as mainly for the purpose of showing what should happen to make sure you have everything covered. For next, we're going to go to product outliers. We have them here. We have 19 outliers, and all of them are low. In other words, and most of them are low or disappears or low and appears. So the result is there's nothing there that stands up, in my opinion, stands up greatly, because we're dealing with low percentiles, underproduction. These are things which will be influenced in terms of chronic fatigue syndrome, because you're not getting enough of the right chemicals in your body. Let's go to another way of looking at it. Let's look at enzyme, which is potentially a massive list, guaranteed to be a headache if you don't have a long focus period. And give it some time. It's going through a lot of data. And we are done, and we come back, and what we find is, as before, we have everything low, down, low, low. Everything is low, and more importantly, we only have something like 1,600 items considered. We only have 26 items listed, and all of them follow the same pattern, which is you have low amount that disappear or disappears and becomes a low amount. Again, a factor for the condition we're looking at, but not likely a factor for the change we saw in the period of 10 days. And the last one of the key outliers would be N-modular. Let's go there. Actually, we'll do N product too. And we are down to just 3. Again, everything is low level issues. And low level can come out of a variety of things, but generally it doesn't give us the smoking gun, which we want to really focus on where something has gone through the roof. We found some of those things already, and let's go back and do the very last one, which is going to end product outliers. And in product outliers, we have the list here, and we have just 25. Again, this tends to be for purpose of a condition, not for a change. And what we can do is just these glass, take a look down there, and we do see hydrogen peroxide sitting there. We have a couple other things which have gone up. A couple things has gone from nothing like tryptophan or something to a high level. So those are things which are a concern, but they are a bit harder to act upon because we have to somehow figure out how to reduce it. What we can do, if we want to do it, is just click on one of these, and voila, it takes us to the bacteria involved. Oh, okay. So we now know that we have the same old suspect as we did before. And so that was sort of interesting. Let's try this one also. Blottia again. We keep coming back to the same suspects from multiple ways. So we end up saying, okay, we have our suspects. We have the bacteria whose change is probably likely causing it. Okay, now let's go back to samples and let's take a look at the data a different way. And this is basically more for visual. And give me a second while I flip the screen over. What I've done is I have opened two separate windows, placed them side by side, and went to the corona chart, which is in the visualization thing. And the main thing is it gives you a nice visual of what has changed. Here is on the left, we have a 5 sample, you see up here, and we see almost an even balance between bacteroids and firmicutes. Both of them are about the same amount. Here is in the middle of a deterioration, and we notice, guess what? We have this major drop of the bacteroids and an increase of the firmicutes. Excuse my pronunciation. That's a inheritance autism. I'm being very late, as in 9 or 10, before going to speak, which means that my memory of pronunciation is lousy, which is why languages requirements in high school were a challenge. Okay, but I didn't make it. Okay, so we have the major change, and what we can do is we can drill down to take a look at relative changes. For example, let's just say we click on firmicutes. Notice how the chart magically changes. Over here we click on firmicute 2, and now we have the percentage in each samples, and we can see if the percentage shift has happened. For example, when the dominant one is Bacterium here, and we have 28% in one, and we have 26% in another, and we're no major change, or at least no apparent major change. And we can go through and take a look at other things. We went from 5 to 4. We have the unknown here. We have 3%. So we have here, we have some of these things being less, but those are the oddballs, which we already have seen is less. And here we have our lactobacillus, our troublesome lactobacillus. It's a small part of the puzzle, but it is a super producer of hydrogen peroxide, which means its weight is far more than the numbers. Basically, it's something to be considered. And then over here we have other things. If we take a look at Blottia here, it is there. We have something like 12% here. Over here, you notice that it is a much bigger. It goes up from being about a sixth of a circle to a quarter of a circle, and it went from 12% to 17%. So it becomes a much bigger player, and we can go along, and we see things are all generally about the same, which means, okay, so firmicutes, which would increased, we can see what the key elements are. One doesn't stand out apparently because it's a small percentage, but it happens to be carrying a very big stick. Now we can go back up on both of these and go over to the other side. Let's go down 2 layers. And we can do a comparison to see what we know is or isn't changed. This here area, which has no names on it, means these are bacteria which have not been classified. The lab doesn't have samples for it. They are unknown. They are undiscovered. They don't have a name assigned to them. And then we have things, the Peroxide clara has gone down from 25 to 23%, etc. But what we find is that they tend to be, our stripes is 1%, was 2%, so it also has gone down. So it's a different way of visualizing the change. But the main thing we find is that it shows how much the shift happens, and that the biggest culprit in the shift was actually Blottia. So it confirms our list of suspects. So let's go on from there. I'm going to hop back to our comparison page, and we're going to actually look at what we didn't do before, which is the taxonomy differences. We could try that with outliers, but I'm more curious to do just look at raw data because I know what I want to filter over. So we have there with all of the lovely stuff, big list. You have how many? We have 734 items, lots of reading, but what we can do is just drop in the word Blottia and take a look, and you can see that most of the Blottia has gone up. If we do it by count of the second sample. Okay, I know why. Numerics, but okay, we see the ones which has increased, and wait a minute, that's almost a doubling. That is a real major increase, another 50% increase. Another one, which is the genus as a whole, went up by 17,000, but most of that, a good chunk of that is all coming from that one. Another one, the Felicis has gone up massively. And there, so what we can do is go and click here for the main offenders. And other ones which have no change we can ignore. And then we'll add them to a handpicked bacteria list. And let's take a look at handpicked bacteria. So we have those in there. And that's something which I picked earlier. Again, it was a one with a significant shift. Although not quite as high, so we could actually remove it if we want. So I'm going to change that, and now we're over to the suggestion page. And what we're going to do is see what the suggestions are. And go through, and actually I'll click that just for the fun of it. I'll unclick that. Let's leave that in. And we now have suggestions. Click up here, and you see that our suggestions are targeted only for the Blottia. And here we have the items of concern, and what we find is that licorice, resveratrol, vitamin A derivative, actually those top three are the ones which are really dominant. And over here we have an interesting things to avoid is this particular lactobacillus. Oh, this lactobacillus encourages that. Lactobacillus encourages Blottia. So we are having interplay between all high lactobacillus, the strange one, and Blottia, cacao, bifidobacteria, barley, resistant starch. Here we have an interesting, we have vitamin A here, and we have vitamin A derivative there, which means that generally it's a wash. And once you get down to sort of the common level here, it's what I would call a wipeout. Just say, confidence isn't strong enough to want to use unless you really, really are confident of it. Commercial probiotics. We have one there, and that one is particularly high. And if we go click here for citations, what we find is we'll find name of the product and what is in it, which is of interesting So we have Peroxide being it. And as you can see, we have links to the studies of which were used in the logic to determine what to do. So that's just sort of a quick reflection. And so, and then again, same thing with citations. If we click there, you'll see the citations of our coming to this case. Okay, yeah, it comes from that. And each one of which our main candidates all comes from the same source. So we have that. Remember that finding information is a challenge. People usually are motivated to do studies because of a manufacturer providing money to do the studies, which means there's a lot of areas which should be studied, which haven't been studied because there's no profit to be made from it. Almost like a Ferengi on Star Trek attitude. So we have a list of items there, which is good. Okay, I went back and I had gone and done the temporary change. I've gone back to the original page, rechecked it, clicked Search Original, and now when I go over to handpicked bacteria and go over here, do the same thing as before, click View, and what we now find, there's a change happened. The change is this particular one, which were included, mainly because it is in the same class. It's connected to the other, even though it doesn't say Blottia. It used to be called Blottia once upon a time. Let me just verify that. And nope, it wasn't. But it is. Blottia was a genus which was created relatively late, and sometimes you have inconsistencies in names or they're related, but we have different name ones. But if we include it, we do have something which is interesting. What we have here is we now have probiotics being suggested. We have the same three at the top, and now we have something new showing up. And we also have those dropping down. We have Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Portureki showing up there. But what we have on the right side is don't take it. Huh? What do you mean? It says take it here, don't take it here. Let's stop for a moment. This is a combination. And the catch is the last part of it, the Propionibacterium PF, that's called PF, make life easier on your ears and my throat, is what causes the difference, which means that particular one is the one which you are wanting to do. Turns out that is available as a probiotic all by itself, so you don't have to get a combination. You can get that combination, and because of this apparently contradiction and breaking down and saying, wait a minute, the difference is this additional bacteria being added to probiotic, it made a difference. So, although that doesn't actually show up anywhere there, we also have another one added, which is Triphala there. All of the changes were caused by just adding in one more bacteria. Most of them are maintained. One more item gets tossed in there. And so there's not a definitive list of suggestions. You can go very sparse or very wide. And you can actually play back and forth to get the actual thing. So let's get closer to the summary. After that, I'll hop back to my blog post because some of the stuff came out of spending time on National Library of Medicine. For example, this specific bacteria was sticking out there like a sore thumb. And if you go over, look at PubMed, and we find there are exactly 5 studies, period. 5 studies total on this particular bacteria. And what is interesting is that there's so little information about it, but the information there is interesting. For example, if you want to reduce it, spend time in space. Interesting study. Save up your pennies and plan a space flight, hoping that you can pass the medical expense solution. And another way it gets reduced in the study is if you have MRSA infection. Again, not something you really want to get. It will improve, but the side effects are not what you really want. Which means that the two ways we have literature on that reduces it are both really not likely to be used. But what we also find is this particular key important fact, which is it is the dominant one in a healthy that and Lactobacillus gensei, which is available as a probiotic, but the question is whether you really want to. Are they the strong hydrogen peroxide producers? Keeps a woman's vagina healthy, but in this case, in the gut, we may not be so happy about it. In fact, I'm not so happy about it. And what we do find is we find some literature about, since we know what chemical is involved, we find that it appears to have an impact on a causal agent of IBD, irritable bowel diseases, and is often which is often associated with CFS ME. In other words, is a contributor to IBS, etc. We can also go over to another one. What do we know? We have another one. We only have 14 bits of information about it. Again, you can just click here and see all the information available. And we have 14 there and goes down. And notice reclassification, which is moving things from one naming to a different naming. Same bacteria. This is a rosebud, never name if you want. So we have 14 there. And going through there, we find things that are related to, nothing explicitly reduces it explicitly. So we are over to general Blottia, and the general Blottia, what we have comes from, we have already reviewed in suggestion. Cake data is there, and we end up going to do it. And actually, if we take a look at hydrogen peroxide and cake data, let's go back and do it. Let me go and get that window back up. Since the page when you do comparison is slow, I'm going to actually go over and go in the component analysis, go down to cake enzymes. I know which one I want there. The enzyme number was 1.2.3.3. And I got a broken page. I had to do it the old-fashioned way. The magic numbers are over there. 1.2.3. There we are. And this one is a key one. And what we find is it goes up. And what we can do is if we click here, we can find out the bacteria which are high in this particular enzyme, and this enzyme presence tends to be tolerant. And one, we see that the percentiles are pretty high across the board, including one at 100%. So in other words, the bacteria is encouraging. Okay, let's get back to my notes. So cake data is incomplete, which means that we may not necessarily have every bacteria there. And what we have is the listing of the bacteria which double, all of which are tolerant to hydrogen peroxide, and we have the hydrogen peroxide level being raised. So, where do we go from here? Well, a couple of interesting things. One thing was that Streptococcus aureus is basically implicated in things. What we really want to do is reduce the hydrogen peroxide levels in the gut so that other bacteria which would be killed off won't be killed off, or which are being reduced will grow back. So that is a direct chemical process, which is nice. It's a pure chemical process. Just like sort of taking baking soda for acid stomach and other things. And what we find is that there's a magical chemical, catalase, which breaks down hydrogen peroxide very well. In fact, when I used to teach general science in high school, if I wanted to create a lovely volcano with things bubbling out, put in a little bit of this chemical, add in hydrogen peroxide, and suddenly I have a erupting volcano on my lab desktop. So impressive to deal with. It's that type of almost immediate reaction, which means when you start with a small dose. You don't want to see foam coming out of your mouth, because then you will be distressed, or never end just bubbling out there. So you want to start with a low dosage and work up. It is found in some foods, and if you have a restricted diet, you may well not be getting any of it, which means that the hydrogen peroxide levels aren't being naturally inhibited by food intake. So what we have is this one little thing, and I noticed that Blottia is catalase negative, that it doesn't produce it, so it doesn't do anything to neutralize the hydrogen peroxide being done. But I also noticed something else. The Streptococcus aureus also is catalase negative. And there I give links to 2 prior posts, and both of those, this other catalase negative bacteria is associated with chronic fatigue syndrome. So the fact that you may be deficient in this in terms of bacteria producing it may be a significant contribution. Again, speculation, keyword speculation, or modeling, or logical deduction, whatever you care to call it. Okay, so takes us right into an actual item, not suggestion from the microbiome, but going through the medical literature and trying to piece together a path for dealing with the high hydrogen peroxide. We know what the issue is. We want to reduce hydrogen peroxide. How do we do it is a interesting thing. A bit of searching on the internet and high quality studies only, is that we have this one particular thing which breaks down hydrogen peroxide, is available as a supplement. Let's go over here. And there we have it as a supplement. 60 pack, $25. And 5,000 milligrams a day dosage is another question of it. But here's one of the interesting things. You notice it has it here as actually part of a gray hair formula. And that is because high hydrogen peroxide levels are associated with graying of hair. If you look at my hair, my brother, who's 5 years older, and my father, at my age, and another 20 years older, still kept his hair color. I lost it. I lost it during one of the episodes of chronic fatigue syndrome. So hydrogen peroxide, for me, becomes a particularly interesting aspect of it, and I'll be checking my own samples later to see if indeed it is a factor which I need to probably take the safe supplement with, if confirmed. Okay, so brand new supplement you probably have never heard of before, or few people have. And there are no studies, so it is a novel approach for chronic fatigue syndrome. It has never been tried. So this person, if he takes my suggestion and it's approved by his MD, keyword approved by his MD, will be number one of a unofficial trial, not clinical because I'm not a clinic. It is being treated for treating IBD, and there's a link to the study there. No study results aren't in, but the suggestion of using it for CFS ME is not so oddball when considering it's being used for IBD, and IBS is often associated, and other IBDs are associated with CFS ME. Another possibility is magnesium oxide, magnesium supplement. Lease is another one, but lease is mainly because it actually contains this one chemical. So you can get it as a pure or you can get it via lease. The question is, how much are you getting it? My preference is usually known quantities. Lease, sometimes you can take 15 tablets and discover that you're only getting 10 milligrams. What I refer to as non-homeopathic, homeopathic-like medicine, where you are getting dosages below that, which is likely to cause a positive response. And that's basically it. Here's the video from the first time which you look at the person, and the person I was looking at was trying to treat chronic fatigue condition. This time through, and the video will be showing up at the bottom of the page, I am not looking at trying to come suggestion of chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm trying to look at what caused the deterioration from level 5 to level 1. The side effect of it is it may actually make implications for how to raise a person above a 5 to a higher level of functioning. Main key thing, a key takeaway is that this is only possible because we had 2 samples back to back. In other words, if you have a condition and you're prone to fluctuation, wait till you're in a very good state. Take a sample, send it up. And if you crash, or if you can induce a crash, cough, 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 not that you really want to, within a few days, then have the crash, take a new sample and send it up. The time between the 2 samples is key for easy analysis, and the reason is there is natural microbiome drift, and the longer the time between the 2 samples, the more false alerts that shows up. As you may remember at the beginning, when we looked at things, we find that a whole stack of things were almost unchanged, and what we really want to do is focus only on the things that change associated with a change of condition. Okay, that's basically it. It's an interesting one. I may have another blog post on a similar comparison between 2 people, between 2 lab results, where somebody has done something explicitly. There's a note in my email, and I need to take a look at the dates and see whether or not it's going to be worth the effort. Okay, that's it.